Well, first of all, it's great to be on your show. Thank you both for the invitation. And yeah, greetings from California, which is not so sunny today. It's a funny thing when talking about these events, either Budapest or Alaska or whatever happened in between, because it feels like a roller coaster where before every announced meeting between President Trump and Putin or a phone call, most of the observers, most of the Europeans, are holding their breath. That this could be it. This could be the defining moment. Now we're at the entering Munich Munich stage, basically. Where Ukraine might suffer something at the hands of two leaders, and then again it passes, and and on it goes. And look, I mean, we've soon be entering the first year of that roller coaster, and I ask myself a question, that are we devoting enough time to to watch the fundamentals, and what fundamentally can and should be changing in order to not to come to this sort of situation. So fundamentally, I mean, I fully agree with you that Putin's goals have not changed. I don't think that he can change those goals. He continues wanting to control Ukraine. That's how I would put it. The ceasefire is not something that would work for him. If we don't trust him to hold on to ceasefire's agreement, well, imagine a person who is 1,000 times more paranoid. So it tells you that he would never trust Ukrainians to hold on to a ceasefire. If he doesn't trust, that means the forces that are holding the line will have to stay there. And that means that he is, basically he has a frozen conflict that doesn't serve any real purpose for him, neither politically, nor militarily, nor geopolitically. That means that his goal is to continue. And and all the diplomatic overtures, they might give him an opening, might bring him back on the international stage, but it doesn't solve the war. So we need to be looking at again, as I said, at the fundamentals as to how to change the situation. And unfortunately, there's no other recipe. There's never been as to strengthen Ukrainian hand. So that's one, and steel ourselves, because Putin might continue escalating, on our territories in the West. Yeah, I mean, it's all about strength. The only thing that we should be talking about is balance of strength. Who is stronger on the battlefield? Are we able to stop him? Are we able to make him pay for what he's doing? If we are, then we're on a good track. If we aren't, then we're in trouble. Everything else is at the very least, it's naivete. Now I've been reading the comments in the press about the so-called peace deal that is being prepared by the Europeans, and I mean, I'm not sure whether that's really what is going to be published, or if it is going to be published, that 10-point, I think, or 11-point deal, and part of it has even sanction removal. If Putin would freeze the line, the contact line. So it doesn't, the way that Putin will read it, he will read it as weakness in any way. To begin with, that the deal. I mean, we're not even talking about this, but this is an important point, that basically somehow the Europeans are now accepting the notion and hiding behind the Ukrainians that current contact line should be accepted as a ceasefire line. In effect, it already leaves a big chunk of Ukrainian territory in Russian hands. That is already a victory in Putin's minds. And if Europeans would really be thinking that after the ceasefire, there's a sanctions removal, that means that you're leaving Putin with what he occupied and rewarding him, which is completely crazy. And people are arguing that, look, I mean, the biggest difference is that it's not de jure, we will never recognize the occupation, it's only, de facto. Well, I'm saying, okay, so then it's Sudetenland, but not de jure, but de facto. Putin is rebuilding his sphere of influence into the, First of all, the grain zone countries, which have been left out of NATO enlargement. But I think that his ultimate goal is basically to see, what is Western zone, so to say, diminish or being changed to unrecognizable state. And I think that this is why he sees President Trump as some sort of an ally, because the statements and even the sentiment that is coming from Washington since the inauguration that Europe has to take care more about its own security and all these things, which you might argue that they are quite right in a sense, but the funny thing is that they coincide with the thinking, right? So Putin wants Americans out of Europe because that's the only thing that now he fears, that Russians and previously the Soviet Unions were worried about. That basically we cannot take on Europe because of United States offering the Article 5 and having it as a common security area. Now, if Americans are out, or the sentiment is that they're out, that gives Putin an opportunity. And I'm not just talking about Ukraine. Ukraine is one country of many where he would see his influence, where he would like his influence to be expanded. So that is why we are being caught in this, I would say, perfect storm. From two sides, we have an enemy that is has ambition, and we have an ally who's probably losing a sense of purpose to stay. Let's see the facts. A country of 40 million was able to withstand Russia through ingenuity, through political will, the will of the people to fight. Of course, it's mired with thousands of problems, but they managed to, right? We would like the situation where Ukraine, we would like the situation that Ukraine wins against Russia, right? So that should be ideal. So we're not at the ideal scenario, but we're not at the worst scenario. So when I'm thinking that countries, like Germany and France and United Kingdom and the whole European continent united has trouble imagining that we would be able to inflict damage onto Russia to an extent where Russians would not want to continue. That is, I don't know what it is. At the very least, it's lack of imagination.
How about political will?
Yeah, but it's it seems that we lost the ability to imagine things, right? It's out of realm of possibility, because maybe people are thinking, well, if we do just anything, then it's nuclear war, and we cannot withstand that. Well, Ukrainians don't have this in their equation, right? They're not thinking, well, maybe let's not shoot at Russians because we might risk a nuclear war. They're defending their country. One thing about the latest attack, it's an excellent example, and I'm really glad that you brought it up. This is what I've been using as a theoretical example. Like, this is how you build up pressure on Russia, right? So we have to tell that, and one of the biggest leverages that we can create on Putin is that if you continue this, you won't have an economy, not because of sanctions, but because you won't have any factory that is still working. And it is possible to limit escalation and to slow down this, the escalation ladder, but basically telling, look, Vladimir, you have thousands of factories, but we have 10,000s of rockets. And they're pretty, well guided. We know the targets. We will help Ukrainians guide them. And by the end of this year, you won't have any industry to talk about. And look, the same thing happened with the Black Sea. I've used, maybe David also, during our conversation, I might have used this example where, at the beginning, Europeans were saying, well, all of us were saying, look, there's nothing that we can do, to help Ukraine to figure out what to do in the Black Sea. They built up their weapons, they built up their maritime drones, and now all of the Russian fleet is locked into few ports in somewhere in the east, and that's it. You don't need a drone for every ship that there is. You basically need to tell that I'm able to hit every ship that is out there in the sea, and that works as a deterrent. So for Russians, this is what they should be thinking about, that every factory, every point of industry is now a target. And it's just a question of time. We have a calendar and we're going day by day, by the value of the piece of industry. So I'm really glad that that United Kingdom is participating in this, and I'm truly it's an amazing achievement. Now the Baltic mindset, yes. I mean, the problem is that in the Baltics we tend to be consumed by our smallness, so to say. We're not a country of 40 million like Ukraine or Poland. Lithuania is the biggest out of the Baltic states, and we're 2.8 million. So for us to consider us being able to fight, it's a very difficult psychological challenge. And I've tried to argue that in Lithuania, that look, I mean, Finland is not that much larger, a country of 4 million people, but they overcame, either from the success of the Winter War, I mean, the ability that they've shown that they are able to to inflict damage on much greater enemy. But they have this, that they are not constricted by the fact that they're a small country. And I would like us to be a bit more like that, right? I mean, yeah, we're small. Yes, we're 2.8 million, but with enough technology, with enough, if all of us work together, and especially if all of us in Baltic states, we can definitely inflict a lot of damage on an attacker. It's all. I mean, Ukrainians are acting like, very, very similarly, like countries in the Second World War, fighting against Nazis, right? Your goal is to win, right? You have limited resources, you have limited supplies, limited amount of friends, so you do whatever it takes, right? And ingenuity is being born out of necessity, right? So it's like the saying goes, and. So this is exactly what happens in Ukraine, right? So they are not sticking to the old plans of a pre-war planning, or the conceptions, or some blocks of thinking that, for example, constrict us in the West so many times. They're looking at the inventory that they have. They're looking at Russian map, and they're figuring what would fit where the best. And and it's amazing, and I wish we would do more of that. Right. So there are ways how to inflict damage. There are ways how to make Putin pay for what he's doing in Ukraine, or even for the drone incursions and so many other things. But I mean, we're still not learning so much from Ukrainians. That's the sad part. But I would say that at this stage, Europeans have to act as if we are alone, as if we don't have American support where we most need it. And that, so kind of form this mindset. And if the things change in Washington, if President Trump decides that he wants to, to participate in this in a meaningful way, really to putting pressure on Putin, then we accept it and we'll be happy about it. Don't close the door, but prepare for the situation that is as it currently has been for the last, almost 10 months, that unfortunately we're in this alone. Well, there are a couple of things. So one is the price that Putin is already paying to an extent, and another price being, he's paying because of Ukrainian action. So we can always make this price, we have means for this price to go up. Additional weapons to Ukraine, right? So so there have been talks about Tomahawk, there were talks about Taurus, for 3 years now. That is one way how to do it. Give Ukrainians more of what they are able to use. An example with Storm Shadows is an excellent one, right? And allow them to use that. This is how this will surely make Putin pay. Now, the other question is whether we are able to ask for a price when there's an escalation on the West. And it's a bit more subtle. So not necessarily this should change. It could change ultimately Putin's behavior vis-a-vis Ukraine, right? But it should show that it's not just an invitation to walk over the Europeans. Because in some cases, it is what it's felt, at least as a person, who, as a European, 12 minutes in Estonian airspace with a fighter jet. Well, basically the message is, it did not pose any threat. That means that it's fine to do that. So, and it will continue. That it will continue. So, how do you make sure that he would get the message? Okay, there is a price. I mean, 12 minutes. Europeans got irritated, and now suddenly my airport near St. Petersburg is not working. Or 20 drones, and I don't know. Suddenly people need to check their pagers because they got worried that something might overheat in their pockets. I'm using an example that has been an operation in Middle East. So kind of I'm suggesting the ideas that do not necessarily change the calculus of Putin in Ukraine, but clearly it would change the calculus vis-a-vis Europe, right? Because now everything is an invitation. I've asked a question. So 12 minutes with a fighter jet in Estonia is fine. Is 30 minutes still okay? 50 minutes with 2 jets? I mean, but by saying that it's fine, we basically then allow his imagination to run wild. Right, so he might not attack at this stage, right? Anything, but he will continue. He will continue intimidating until one day, basically the frog will understand that that the water is boiling. Well, for Europe is a bit easier because one thing is immediately on top of my mind is confiscating the Russian frozen assets, right? So that allows European countries to finance Ukraine for years to come. At least a couple of years to come, but I mean, it's an enormous amount of money that would really make a difference. For NATO, probably what we need now is it's developed response scenarios to what we still call the hybrid activities, where we would be able to draw a very clear red line that this is it. I mean, hybrid or non-hybrid, there is an element of war. Russians have malign intent against NATO countries, and there will be a response. And we need to figure out the instrumentarium as to what instruments we're going to use, as I mentioned, because so we don't want to trigger a nuclear response clearly, but there are ways how to make Putin pay. That would calm people down in the eastern flank. Basically, they are defended, that their airspace is defended, that the skies are defended, that we have the capabilities. So that's number one. Probably the second, again from top of my mind, changing the narrative as to who needs who more. We've always been talking about that Ukraine needs NATO more. And that is true to an extent, basically, that Ukraine does need NATO. But now I think that we're at the stage in time where NATO needs Ukraine. And that means that we have to start integrating their knowledge fully into the preparedness of the eastern flank. When it comes to drone defenses, when it comes to long strike capabilities, and that would in turn start creating a new deterrence measures. So if Russians know that now we have Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, Finns, Poles have the capacity using Ukrainian technology to hit every single factory that Russians have, the same way that Ukrainians are doing that, well, that is a deterrent, right? Because you have troubles fighting Ukraine alone, and suddenly you have all the eastern flank arming up with the same, with the same weapons, and not by 2035, 2040s, because now the queues at all the factories that we're procuring equipment are so long that stuff will arrive in 10 years. And this is where Europeans are saying, well, we need 10 years to be ready. Well, Ukrainians are ready now, right? And I mean, as much as they can. So we should be integrating and learning everything that we can, and really get this match going. That's it. Ukraine is already a part of European security architecture. We managed to put a man on the moon out of political will. There was a political decision, agency was established, a rocket was built, people were trained, and next thing you know, people are on the moon, right? So everything is possible, like literally. I mean, it's the as you say, I mean, it's the matter of political will, whether we have it, where we see that it's needed or not. I've always used this example, and I will continue using it, that so far, Europe has spent far less on Ukraine than it has on COVID. I haven't checked the numbers, but I mean, I was told that also, when there was a debt crisis in Greece, Europe has spent more on Greece than on Ukraine. So it tells you where on our, on a table of problems, where is Ukraine? So it's not the top priority. I mean, it's how you define the problem, right? When the COVID hit, the problem felt so acute that that Europe for the first time borrowed as a union, 750 billion euros. Part of that money is still not spent, and now it's being used on defense. 150 billion is from the COVID fund, but there is no new instrument, no new vehicle that has been created with the new money to fund our defense. That means that we still don't see that as a major problem, as major as, let's say, COVID. Before the Second World War, France, the government had real issues because of the budget deficits that were running some 5% or something like that. And the Minister of Finance said, well, that he's going to resign if he's forced to spend more. A couple of years later, the situation was dramatically different. For the whole France. United Kingdom before the war as well. I mean, Chamberlain ramped up spending on defense, up to 4% and a bit more of the GDP towards defense. But at the height of the war, the spending was almost 50% of GDP to defense. So it's, I mean, that is a problem. That's not a problem, but that's the way the democracies work, right?
And Ukraine's at 60%, I think.
Yeah, Ukraine's
at least 60%. At the high point in the war.
Yeah. And I mean, before the war, many Ukrainians, even Ukrainian officials, would have believed that, we won't have a war, as did many countries, my country, and so many other people who believe, well, maybe it's still avoidable. Maybe we don't need that much. So that is a problem. That means that it could lead us to a situation where we, with our delayed investments, that we are in a way inviting again the increased escalation against us. Because look, I mean, David, we spoke with you about this, that, so for the way that, very simplistically put, how Putin is thinking, we're telling him that, look, in 10 years, you won't be able to attack us. That's for sure, right? Because our factories will be then running in full speed. We have ammunition, we have tanks, we have drones, we have everything. We'll be fine in 10 years. So he looks at the watch and says, well, fine, okay, that gives me an idea when I need to do things, right? And for him, this opportunity is either now, from now up until those 10 years, or later he might have lost his chance. When you're talking about the interest, you see, I mean, the way that military industry works during the peacetime is that we produce very expensive, shiny things in a very small quantities. They look good in the pictures. They create deterrent, and and basically easy to store, right? So you have 10 rockets that can fly anywhere in the world, and this is, you don't need more, right? But they are incredibly expensive. And now come Ukrainians and they say, well, we don't have those rockets, so we develop something that is extremely cheap, very expendable, and we have abundance of it. And when you try to argue with representatives from the defense industry, and you say, well, maybe we should be spending at least part of our money, let's say 10%, 20% or something that's, kind of has a Ukrainian mindset behind it, right? So it's cheaper, more expendable. There are people who are fighting tooth and nail for it, against it. Because they would say, well, but what about our, super expensive rockets? Because you clearly need those, and yeah, there's a tiny problem. They will arrive by 2040, but look how shiny they are. And
that's how they described it at Brave One to me. They called it ugly stuff that works.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. So you have an interest there. Well, I would say, okay, fine. So we lack so many things. We have political will. We lack the money. We have lack the funds, that would have been created in order to fund all the things that and prepare them now. Okay. So what do we do with the resources that we have, which are limited, and the threat that is just out there? So we use a Ukrainian example and do the things that Ukrainians are doing. And suddenly you are fighting at home because people just don't want to do it, because that hurts their interests. So that is also an interesting thing to consider. Yeah, I'm not saying that we don't need those, right? I'm saying that there is a chance to combine, to combine the stuff that is needed to implement in NATO regional plans and everything. Lithuania is buying tanks and tens of new tanks. But I believe that at this stage, if we want to get prepared and deter Russia, there's no better example has got to do it like Ukrainians. Again, even though I'm talking about my home region, I wouldn't be too much surprised about this. He wants to put pressure on Europe. He wants to divide Europe from Ukraine, and putting pressure on Europe could serve him quite well. Meaning he wants people to start asking questions. Should we be sending weapons to Ukraine? We have troubles at home, and we need to take care about our own security more. So ramping up those shadow activities, the shadow war activities, that would serve the purpose. I know, I've spoken with Edward, a lot of times, and I know what he means, and I agree with him. But there is a fine line between overhyping and then coming to such a degree where people are not doing what is necessary. And and it's very, very difficult to navigate that line, right? So if you say that, well, we are going to be attacked, and people freak out and they just stop doing anything because they're so worried about this. But you say, look, we're completely fine. Everything is okay. We have Americans in our back. Germans are coming. We'll be fine, and people will just relax. And and then we have, just people spending hours and hours upon silly conversations, and rather than doing the right thing. So then you need to say, well, unfortunately, we're not as safe as as we might think that we are.